This Sunday, breaking point.
You don't have the cards right now.
A dramatic Oval Office meeting with Ukraine's president turns combative as tensions rise over efforts to make a peace deal with Russia.
You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. You're either going to make a deal or we're out.
Are we witnessing a realignment of the U.S. and its allies? Plus, spending showdown. As President Trump prepares to address Congress and the nation, Republicans are promising nearly $1 trillion in spending cuts. Can they do it without cutting popular programs like Medicaid?
It won't be read my lips anymore. We're not going to touch it.
And legal challenges.
If we don't do this, America will go bankrupt. That's why it has to be done.
Elon Musk's efforts to slash government agencies are being blocked by multiple federal judges. Will the court rulings hold?
He's tearing down our institutions for fun. It's a game. It's not public service.
My guest this morning, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News Washington Managing Editor Carol Lee, Telemundo News anchor Julio Vaqueiro, former Democratic Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, and Republican strategist Brendan Buck. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Kristen Welker.
Good Sunday morning. The stakes are incredibly high as President Trump prepares to address a joint session of Congress Tuesday night. It comes as newspapers around the world are highlighting what appears to be a realignment of U.S. alliances and a stunning turn towards Russia. On Friday, in a heated confrontation in the Oval Office, President Trump and Vice President Vance berated President Zelenskyy in an explosive and unprecedented televised showdown. Now, U.S. officials say the path to a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine is deeply uncertain and wholly dependent on the Ukrainian leader's next steps. Since the clash, Trump administration officials have also discussed whether to pause U.S. military aid to Ukraine, according to two administration officials, though it's unclear whether or when the president would take such a step. The meeting took a sharp turn when the vice president mentioned talks with Russian President Putin.
The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy.
He broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
The meeting then descended into a shouting match.
During the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Today.
Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. at one point hid her face in her hands. A White House official tells NBC News that following the confrontation, President Zelenskyy was asked to leave the White House. A planned joint news conference abruptly canceled. A minerals deal that was completed left unsigned. President Trump posting on social media he disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace. The confrontation comes just days after the U.S. sided with Russia over Europe at the United Nations, opposing a resolution condemning Russian aggression on the third anniversary of its invasion of Ukraine. The Oval Office showdown was cheered in Russia. Putin ally Dmitry Medvedev writing, quote, "The insolent pig finally got a proper slapdown in the Oval Office." As U.S. military support for Ukraine hangs in the balance, President Zelenskyy weighed in on Fox News.
So I'm not hearing from you, Mr. President, a thought that you owe the president an apology.
No, I respect the president and I respect American people. And if, I don't know, if I think that we have to be very open and very honest. And I'm not sure that we did something bad. This is so sensitive. You know, just a ceasefire without security guarantees. This is so sensitive for our people. I'm speaking like a president of a people who are in this struggle 3 years, and they just want to hear that America on our side and that America will stay with us, not with Russia, with us.
And joining me now is the Speaker of the House, Republican Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana. Speaker Johnson, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Hey, Kristen, great to be with you as always.
It's great to have you back, Mr. Speaker. As you know, reaction has been pouring into that Oval Office meeting on Friday. Democrats and even some Republicans say it only emboldened Vladimir Putin. A Kremlin spokesman saying today that the U.S. foreign policy shift, quote, largely coincides with its vision. Here was the Wall Street Journal editorial board, quote, "Putin wins the Trump-Zelenskyy Oval Office spectacle." Was Vladimir Putin the winner here, Mr. Speaker?
No, he wasn't. Listen, I have participated in a lot of bilateral meetings in my time with heads of state and other dignitaries. There's always a certain protocol that goes along with this. I've never seen anything like President Zelenskyy's behavior there. He berated and interrupted his host, and instead of expressing gratitude for the extraordinary help that the U.S. has provided his country and effectively helped him stay alive and stay in power. So the way that went down was very disappointing. I hope and pray, frankly, that President Zelenskyy will come to his senses, come back to President Trump, express gratitude as he should, apologize for his behavior there, and accept this mineral rights deal, because that is the best way for us to get to a point of peace over there in that region, and it's in the interest of both countries.
Well, I want to play you what you said almost a year ago when you argued in favor of sending more aid to Ukraine. Take a listen.
I believe Xi and Vladimir Putin and Iran really are an axis of evil. I think they're in coordination on this. I think that Vladimir Putin would continue to march through Europe if he were allowed. I think he might go to the Balkans next. I think he might have a showdown with Poland or one of our NATO allies. To put it bluntly, I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys.
Mr. Speaker, do you still believe that Ukraine is an ally who the United States should support over Vladimir Putin and an axis of evil?
Yes, it's pretty absurd for anyone in the media or Democrats to somehow proclaim that President Trump, the White House, or Republicans in Congress are on Putin's side. It's a joke. We understand that he is a dangerous adversary, and he is the one that provoked the war. When we did the aid to Ukraine a year ago, the entire point of that, and I was consistent from that moment until today, the whole point was to position Ukraine for peace talks, to make sure that they could hold the line until President Trump returned to the White House, which we knew was going to happen. President Trump is the only figure on the entire globe who is powerful enough to bring both of these parties to the table. And he was in the process of doing that. And he was very, I think, excited about the deal that was going to be consummated yesterday. But President Zelenskyy went in and blew it up. And it is such a great disappointment for everyone. We need to get him back to the table. We need to get Ukraine to express gratitude, of course, for all that we've done for them. But to bring an end to this conflict, it is in America's interest to get this done. And it is certainly, obviously, in Ukraine's interest and all of our allies in Europe and around the world.
But, Mr. Speaker, you're saying that we all know that Putin provoked the war. Actually, President Trump said that President Zelenskyy provoked the war. The week started with the U.S. siding with Russia and North Korea at the UN, refusing to condemn Russian aggression in Ukraine. It ended with this Oval Office confrontation with Zelenskyy. Is President Trump realigning the United States with Russia here?
No, President Trump is trying to get these two parties to a point of peace. And it takes certain maneuvers and certain strategies to do that. You have two parties who, to this point, have not shown any interest, apparently, in getting to peace. What President Zelenskyy did in the White House was effectively signaled to us that he's not ready for that yet. And I think that's a grave disappointment. We have to get this settled. And we stand with our allies, we always do, but they have to be reasonable. You've got to bring an end to this war. And for Zelenskyy to come in and make demands that he wasn't even making a year ago, I think shows that his priorities are in the wrong place. And I certainly hope that he will come back to his senses. President Trump has been very clear about this, that if he is ready for peace, then we can negotiate a deal. And Kristen, this mineral rights deal is a win-win for everyone. It will give us access to rare earth minerals that we need, and it will provide a level of security for Ukraine. They will effectively be in an economic partnership with us after that point, and we will definitely always defend our interest in our investments. Russia knows that. China knows that. Iran and North Korea know that. And that's a very important message for us to send.
Mr. Speaker, you're saying that the United States stands with its allies, and yet what we saw there in the Oval Office was the president and vice president berating an ally in front of cameras. Just to put a fine point on this, is the United States abandoning Ukraine?
No, they're not abandoning Ukraine. I was with the president a day before that meeting, and he was excited about this mineral rights deal. He believed it, and we all believed it, to be in the best interest of both countries. It is not the president and the vice president that berated Zelenskyy. I saw it the other way around. I saw Zelenskyy rather stiff-necked in the Oval Office. Instead of being gracious and saying thank you and looking for a way out of this mess, he did quite the opposite. Look, that's why members of Congress are frustrated. That's why the American people are frustrated about this. We have to stand for America's principles and America's priorities, and I think this would have accomplished all those things. And it's really unfortunate the way that it developed.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Lindsey Graham on Friday floated the idea that President Zelenskyy may need to resign in order for there to be a peace agreement. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, something has to change. Either he needs to come to his senses and come back to the table in gratitude, or someone else needs to lead the country to do that. I mean, it's up to the Ukrainians to figure that out. But I can tell you that we are re-exerting peace through strength. President Trump has brought back strength to the White House. We knew that this moment would come. We worked hard for it to come. And now it's here. But we need these parties to go along with this. And we need President Zelenskyy to do what is necessary. This war has drug on far too long. He's lost hundreds of thousands of people, including women and children. We've got to bring an end to it. And I think our European allies are hoping that that is the case, and we are as well.
Okay, so just to put a fine point on that, you are saying that it might be necessary for President Zelenskyy to step down and not Putin. Do you want to see Putin step down?
I'd like to see Putin defeated, frankly. He is an adversary of the United States.
Okay.
But in this conflict, we've got to bring an end to this war. It's in everybody's interest.
All right. Well, I do want to talk about the big budget bill that passed through the House. Your plan calls for almost $900 billion over the next 10 years in cuts from the Energy and Commerce Committee. As you know, it's going to be nearly impossible to reach that level of cuts without touching entitlements. I know you have been asked this before, Mr. Speaker, but I need to get you on the record here again. Are cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security off the table?
Yes, and don't take my word for it, Kristen. Go do a word search of the budget resolution that we passed on Tuesday. There is not one mention of Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. It's not in the bill because we haven't set the policy. What we're trying to do is get America back on sound fiscal ground. We have a $36 trillion federal debt and ballooning deficits. The Republican Party is the party of fiscal responsibility. The American people want us to review the expenditures of the country and get our fiscal house in order, and that's what we must do. At the same time, we've got to extend the Trump-era tax cuts so we can make sure that every American does not receive the largest tax increase in U.S. history at the end of this year. We have very serious work. We can do both of those things simultaneously and not affect benefits for anyone who relies upon those and is eligible to receive them. President Trump's been crystal clear about this, and we have as well. But in those programs, you have lots of inefficiencies. In Medicaid, for example, there's an estimated $50 billion a year that is lost in fraud alone. We've got to clean that up, and the people want us to do it. That's what we're talking about, ensuring efficiencies, ensuring that the programs are strengthened so that they can remain solvent and help the people they're intended to help.
So you say there won't be any cuts to entitlements, but on Friday, Elon Musk, who President Trump has, of course, put in charge of making cuts all across the government, called Social Security, quote, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. Mr. Speaker, is that a sign that Social Security is Elon Musk's next target?
No, well, I've met with Elon about this multiple times. We meet late into the night in his office, and we've looked at that. What he's finding with his algorithms crawling through the data of Social Security system is enormous amounts of fraud, waste, and abuse.
So it's a target.
And we need to target that. The American people want us to. No, Kristen, don't put words in my mouth. What I am saying is we have a moral responsibility to ensure that those programs are conducted in a way that does not allow for this massive fraud and abuse. And that's what he is finding. He's finding, for example, that one Social Security number can be assigned to dozens or maybe hundreds of people, so that every time there's a check distribution, it goes to all those different addresses. There was no safeguard in the existing software, the Social Security, to prevent that from happening. That is outrageous. And when these examples are presented to the American people, they're going to be on the side of Doge and Elon, President Trump, and the Republicans in Congress. And we look forward to cleaning that up.
It's worth noting the Social Security Administration's internal watchdog found that less than 1% of benefit payments were improper. I do want to get to my final question, though, which is about the shutdown.
Don't believe it. Hey, don't believe it.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, in 2 weeks, there is a potential government shutdown, Mr. Speaker. A lot of people worried about this. Can you guarantee that the federal government will stay open?
We are working hard to do our responsibility to keep the government open. Democrats have to help negotiate this, and they've, to this point, shown no interest in finding a reasonable solution for that. We're looking to pass a clean CR to freeze funding at current levels to make sure that the government can stay open while we begin to incorporate all these savings that we're finding through the Doge effort and these other sources of revenue that President Trump's policies are bringing to the table. And then for FY26, for the next fiscal year, you're going to see a very different process and a lot more efficient and effective spending for the people. We look forward to that.
But, Mr. Speaker, of course, Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. So isn't it on Republicans to keep the government open, and will you do so?
Well, government funding is always bipartisan. You have to have partners on both sides of the aisle to do it, and we need our Democrat colleagues to come to the table and be reasonable about that. They want to use government funding as some sort of weapon against President Trump and his administration, and that is not the way this is supposed to work. Republicans are going to do the responsible thing. We're going to do our duty and keep the government open, and we're working in good faith, negotiating in good faith with our colleagues in Congress to get that done, and I hope everyone will come to the table and do their job.
All right. Covered a lot of ground today. House Speaker Mike Johnson, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you.
Great to be with you. When we come back, Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma joins me next. Welcome back. And joining me now is Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Senator Lankford, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks. Good to see you again.
Great to see you. You have been a longtime supporter of defending Ukraine. In fact, back in 2022, you co-sponsored legislation that called for the U.S. to protect Ukraine, quote, before, during, and after the invasion. Based on what you witnessed in the Oval Office, Senator, are you concerned that the United States is turning its back on Ukraine?
No, we're not turning our back on Ukraine, nor should we. Putin is a murderous KGB thug that murders his political enemies and is a dictator there. And so we've seen that. We've seen his aggression. Countries around him have seen that. Obviously, the Ukrainian people have seen that. The challenge is now we're at a stalemate. This is a World War I-like trench warfare, and it is best to be able to get to at least a pause. And what I hear President Trump saying over and over again is we need to get to a stop in fighting, find some resolution. I understand Zelenskyy is rightfully concerned that Putin has violated every single agreement he's ever signed and that he can't be trusted. He's looking for some kind of security guarantees, which the French and the UK are saying they want to put troops in. But we need to get these two folks at the table, get to some kind of resolution to something that may look like North and South Korea for a long time and have a line where people are looking at each other, but not an active war.
As you know, extraordinarily, the Kremlin is cheering what it saw in the Oval Office. Let me ask you about something I just discussed with Speaker Johnson, which is that Senator Lindsey Graham has said that President Zelenskyy may need to resign in order for this peace process to move forward. What say you, Senator? Do you think President Zelenskyy might need to resign?
I don't agree. I'm not interested in calling on the resignation of other world leaders. I didn't like it when Chuck Schumer asked for Netanyahu to be removed. I don't like it when other members of the Senate asked for Zelenskyy to be removed either. Quite frankly, I think that would spiral Ukraine into chaos right now, trying to find who is the negotiator to bring an issue to peace. If you remember in that press conference in the Oval Office just on Friday, it began with President Trump saying that he is a friend of Zelenskyy. He is interested. They've had good conversations. I think they understand each other, and that obviously there are differences where Zelenskyy wants more in the way of some kind of security guarantees. The United States is not willing to be able to put troops on the ground. We're not willing to do that, but President Trump obviously met with Zelenskyy first. Everybody was talking about Trump is going to work with Putin. He had foreign ministers working with the Russians. He wanted to meet personally with Zelenskyy first. I think that's a very clear sign of where he is and where he stands on this. But he wants to get both sides of the table and get an end to the fighting and the death.
A lot of people are curious, Senator, about the bigger implications of this moment. Are you concerned that what happened in the Oval Office, the fact that the United States sided with Russia and North Korea in that UN vote, for example, the fact that President Trump accused Zelenskyy of starting this war, could that be sending a signal to China that it has a green light to invade Taiwan?
No, it sure should not send that. If China somehow receives that, they're receiving the exact wrong message, that the United States stands with our ally Taiwan, and we, like the rest of the world, want to see peace in that region and to continue to be able to have relationships all across that region. But China should not misread this at all. What President Trump is trying to do is trying to get both sides to the table. This is the interesting challenge that has not been done through this entire war in the last 3 years, to be able to get both sides and then to be able to figure out how to be able to get a stop to the fighting and then to be able to keep the fighting stopped. That's the next part. That's the biggest next challenge.
It is. We'll have to see if these talks get back on track. I do want to switch gears, talk about the budget bill. You just heard me discussing that with the speaker as well. Of course, what passed the House deals with the president's deportation plan. It extends the 2017 Trump tax cuts. The argument that the speaker or other House Republicans are making is that in order to get tax cuts done, the best chance is to do it together in this, what is called a big, beautiful bill. Do you agree? Will you commit to voting for the bill as it stands?
Well, no one has actually seen the bill as it stands. What we passed right now is what's called the budget framework. It is just we should sit down and start making a plan. It is a very general statement of we need to be able to preserve our tax cuts. We need to be able to actually reduce spending. Now let's sit down and figure out how to be able to do that. So there is no real plan on the table at this point. Now it's time to make the plan. That was literally step one on it. And the key things, you've already outlined some of them. We've got to be able to deal with border security. I think a lot of what's been lost this week, even in all the multiple headlines that are out there, we had a day this week we had less than 200 people try to illegally cross our border. Less than 200. It was just a little over a year ago. There were 12,000 people a day that were illegally crossing our border. So we've had a dramatic shift in what's happening on our southern border. There's a lot of work that's happening, as everyone has seen, on trying to be able to get the economy back on track, to be able to push back on fentanyl coming across our border from the north and the south and with China. So there's a lot of things that are spinning in the air right now. It's a matter of trying to be able to figure out what's the right thing and what stage is every part of the negotiation in.
Well, in terms of what may or may not be in the final package, some of your Republican colleagues have said point blank they are not going to support legislation that cuts Medicaid in any way. So, Senator, let me put this question to you. Would you support a bill that makes cuts to Medicaid or any other entitlement?
So I heard the speaker mention this as well. No one's talking about cutting benefits on this. They're talking about how do you actually cut fraud. Between Medicare and Medicaid, we have, according to government records right now, the Government Accountability Office, almost $100 billion in what they're called either fraud or waste or just we don't know where it went. $100 billion is a lot of money. I think there is an expectation for the American people that they're saying, when is someone going to step in and actually going to fix that? So I think that's a reasonable thing to do. If in your credit card, if somebody swipes your credit card 1,000 miles away from you, you get a warning immediately that says, hey, someone's trying to use your card on that. But in the federal government, you can have $100 billion in waste and no one notices year after year after year. That has to come to a stop. Now, there's lots of other areas of efficiency on this, but that's been an area that both Republicans and Democrat presidents have worked on for years. What this president is saying, it's time to actually solve this, not just talk about it.
I have to ask you, Senator, about something that right now is impacting a number of states, including your neighboring state. A child in West Texas died from the measles this past week, tragically. Senator, it's the largest outbreak in the state in nearly 30 years. The majority of those who are impacted are not vaccinated. Measles was, of course, declared eliminated back in 2000. So, Senator, let me ask you, will you encourage your constituents to get vaccinated against the measles?
No, will I? Do I? I already do encourage people. I've been vaccinated for measles. My children were. I'll one day when I have grandchildren, I'll encourage them to get vaccinated on this. I think it's very important. What we've seen in some of these areas are folks that don't agree with the vaccine, and that they have the right to be able to do. Some of them are in religious communities that don't believe in vaccines at all on it. So I understand some of that. We're respectful of that. But we also understand the measles vaccine has been around for a long time. It is a deadly disease, especially for infants. So it is incredibly challenging for us to be able to keep this under control, to make sure that we're protecting children that are 1 year old and younger that can't get the vaccine. They're not eligible to be able to get it because of their age and their development at that point. So what we've done as a culture is try to be able to keep measles down to be able to protect those that are exceptionally vulnerable in those infants.
All right. Well, I know we'll continue to all watch that closely. Senator James Lankford, have a lot more questions for you, but we are out of time, so please come back soon. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Great to see you. When we come back, Senator Bernie Sanders joins me next. Welcome back, and joining me now is Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Senator Sanders, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Great to be with you.
It's wonderful to have you back, Senator. Let me start with Ukraine and that Oval Office meeting. The reaction continues to pour in, and you just heard me speak with House Speaker Mike Johnson. He left the door open to the possibility that it may be necessary for President Zelenskyy to resign in order to get to a broader peace agreement. Let me ask you this question. Do you think that President Zelenskyy needs to resign in order for there to be a peace deal?
I think that is a horrific suggestion. Zelenskyy is leading a country trying to defend democracy against an authoritarian dictator, Putin, who invaded his country. And I think millions of Americans are embarrassed, are ashamed that you have a president of the United States who says that Ukraine started the war, that Zelenskyy is a dictator. He's got it exactly backwards. The people of Ukraine have lost tens of thousands of soldiers. Their cities are being bombed as we speak. And our job is to defend the 250-year tradition that we have of being the democratic leader of the world, not turn our backs on a struggling country that is trying to do the right thing.
And we will continue to follow that, of course, Senator. We have a lot to get to, so I'm going to talk about budget cuts and switch topics here so we can get to that as well. You heard Speaker Johnson argue that there's massive amounts of waste, fraud, and abuse in entitlement programs like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. In fact, the Government Accountability Office does say that both Medicare and Medicaid made more than $100 billion in payment errors in 2023. Let me ask you, Senator, Democrats were in charge for 4 years. Should the Democratic Party have done more to address some of those issues with the insolvency of our entitlement programs?
And Trump was in power 4 years before that. Look, if there is waste and fraud in the Defense Department, which is the largest single budget item that we fund, which has not been able to fulfill an independent audit in the last 7 times, where there's massive waste and fraud, we should go after waste, fraud, and abuse in every agency of government. There's no argument about that. But let us be very clear. What Republicans are trying to do right now is to make massive cuts in Medicaid, over $800 billion, cuts in nutrition programs which feed hungry children. Why are they doing that? Because they want to be able to use those savings to provide over $1 trillion in tax breaks for the richest 1%, for the Elon Musks and the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses of the world. In my view, you don't take food away from children, health care away from struggling people to give tax breaks to billionaires. Do we go after waste and fraud in every agency of government? Yes, we do.
Well, let me ask you about Social Security. And you raised Elon Musk, Senator, so let me follow up with you on this very point, because he's made some very pointed comments about Social Security. I referenced it earlier in the broadcast. This was to Joe Rogan. I'd like you to hear it and get your reaction on the other side. Take a look.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. Basically, people are living way longer than expected. And there are fewer babies being born. So you have more people who are retired and that live for a long time and get retirement payments. So the future obligation. So however bad the financial situation is right now for the federal government, it will be much worse in the future.
Senator, President Trump says he's not going to touch Social Security. Elon Musk calls it a Ponzi scheme. Do you agree?
No, I think what Musk, the wealthiest guy in the world, just said is totally outrageous. That's a hell of a Ponzi scheme when for the last 80 years, Social Security has paid out every nickel owed to every eligible American. Quite a Ponzi scheme. What is in fact a problem is that if we don't make reforms and improve the funding mechanism, in the next 9 years, the Social Security Trust Fund, which provides about 20% of the funding, will go broke. So what we have got to do, and I think most Americans agree, and I've just introduced legislation to do that, is you lift the cap on taxable income. Right now, Musk, worth $400 billion, contributes the same amount into the Social Security Trust Fund as somebody making $170 million. You lift that cap, we can extend the solvency of Social Security for 75 years, and you can raise benefits. Kristen, right now in America, half of elderly people are trying to get by on $30,000 a year, 22% on $15,000 a year. We've got to raise Social Security benefits. We've got to expand Medicare to include hearing, dental, and vision, not go after these programs which are so important to millions of our seniors.
I want to talk about what you have been doing recently, Senator. You've been crisscrossing the country, talking about warning of what you say is an oligarchy in the United States. We're seeing some video of that right here. Some Democrats argue the best action right now for the party to counter Donald Trump is to do nothing at all. Democratic strategist James Carville wrote this, quote, "Roll over and play dead. Allow the Republicans to crumble beneath their own weight and make the American people miss us." Senator, what say you? Do you think that's a good idea?
No, I don't. In fact, the problem is the Democrats have been playing dead for too many years. 60% of our people live paycheck to paycheck. We have more income and wealth inequality than we've ever had in the history of this country. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country. Millions of seniors are struggling to heat their homes and put food on the table. I don't think you play dead. I think you stand up for the working class of this country and make the point that right now the Trump administration is clearly an administration designed to represent the interests of the Musks of the world. 13 of the people that he nominated to head agencies are billionaires. You know, Kristen, when Abraham Lincoln was in Gettysburg, looking out on the field where so many had died to defend freedom, he talked about a vision of America where we have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. What we have right now in Washington, let me be very clear, is a government of the billionaire class, by the billionaire class, and for the billionaire class. And these guys want to get their greed is uncontrollable. More tax breaks for billionaires, cuts to programs for the elderly, the children, and the poor. We've got to fight back. That's what these trips to Wisconsin and Michigan will be about.
Senator, very quickly, we are just 12 days away from a potential government shutdown. House Speaker Mike Johnson says Democrats have a significant role to play to keep the government open. Some Democrats are saying they're not going to vote for a government spending bill that includes Elon Musk's cuts. Will you vote for a bill to keep the government open if it includes those cuts?
Well, we don't have a bill right now, but I will tell you this. Last I heard, the Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. And I hope they present us with a budget that works for working people, not just for the billionaires.
All right. Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you.
When we come back, are we witnessing a realignment of the U.S. and its allies? Our Meet the Press Minute is next. Welcome back. The Oval Office clash between Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy, a rare public showdown in the White House, marked a significant shift in America's approach to an ally at war with Russia. Back in 1960, Senator John F. Kennedy joined Meet the Press with this warning about the Soviet Union and its growing influence.
We've been living off our fat for the last 3 or 4 years militarily. The Soviet Union made the great breakthrough in space and in missiles, and therefore they're going to be ahead of us in those very decisive weapons of war in the early 60s. What is true in militarily is true economically. Their rate of increase is greater. It's certainly true scientifically. And in the image they give to the world of a country on the make. I do believe that today, October 1960, we are the strongest power in the world. But the point is, when are the curves going to meet? The Soviet Union's relative power has been growing steadily in relation to ours, including its military power, especially in the field of missiles. Now, the point I make is, by 1961, 2, and 3 is the crucial time. Are we going to be ahead then? I'm not sure we are, unless we make a greater effort. We're not going to be, in 1962 and 3, the most powerful country in the world.
When we come back, more on the clash in the Oval Office as the president prepares to address Congress. The panel is here next. Welcome back. The panel is here. NBC News Washington managing editor Carol Lee, Julio Vaqueiro, anchor of Noticias Telemundo, former Democratic Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy of Florida, and Republican strategist Brendan Buck, former advisor to House Speakers Ryan and Boehner. Thanks to all of you for being here. A lot to get to. Carol, you have been talking to your sources throughout the weekend, overnight, and you have new reporting on what the thinking is right now behind the scenes at the White House about any potential path forward for a peace deal. It doesn't look good.
No, and one of the things that we learned in our reporting is the administration officials say there have been discussions in the past 48 hours about potentially pausing aid to Ukraine. Now, it's not clear when that would happen, if the president were to make that decision, or if there's something that would need to take place that would trigger it. But the fact that that discussion is happening really underscores the level of frustration within the administration with President Zelenskyy. Now, from President Zelensky's perspective, he sees President Trump as leaning more closely to Russia than to Ukraine. But in talking to officials this weekend, they don't know where this goes next. They say that this was not a setup. They think it's still possible to deal with Zelenskyy. But as one official said, the ball is in Zelensky's court. He needs to make it right. They don't know exactly how he would do that, except to say that he needs to recognize the paradigm shift. I thought Speaker Johnson outlined a potential roadmap for President Zelenskyy, saying that he needed to show more gratitude, apologize, and sign this minerals deal. But, you know, where this goes from here, we don't really know. And the one thing I would add, Kristen, is that President Zelenskyy irritated President Biden, too. We reported in 2022, they had a phone call, and President Biden lost his temper with Zelenskyy, felt like he wasn't showing enough gratitude. The difference, that was in private, and support for Ukraine among Americans was pretty high, and President Biden wasn't trying to negotiate an end to the war. President Trump promised to do that. This doesn't really get him any closer. I'm so glad you brought up that call with President Biden, Brendan, because it does speak to the fact that President Zelenskyy is someone who's defiant. He does not back down from these requests. There is a discussion, did he misread the room in that moment and push the request too far, get under the skin of another president? I thought it was notable. The other thing that we heard from Speaker Johnson today, a roadmap about how relations could be repaired, but also opening the door to, yes, maybe he does need to step down, something initially floated by Senator Lindsey Graham. What do you make of it?
Well, you certainly have, I think, a pretty big divide. And I think you divide it between people who have clear-eyed views about what's going on in Ukraine as it relates to Russia and people who are more interested in keeping up with whatever Donald Trump just said the day before. And I think I would put Mike Johnson in that latter category. I think both Johnson and Lankford were pretty clear, and they said some things that, frankly, the president wasn't willing to do, that Russia is the enemy here, that we want to defeat them. Frankly, what Zelenskyy said in the Oval Office was relatively unremarkable. He basically outlined those things, and that was so offensive to Donald Trump that we had this enormous blow-up. These two men just said the exact same thing. But we are in a situation now where we are blaming an ally, a person who is fighting for the very survival of their nation. We're piling on him because he stated the obvious, because that was too disrespectful to him. And I think we are missing the bigger point. We need a resolution to this. And I think Donald Trump's narcissism caused what happened here. But I'm hoping that Donald Trump's narcissism will actually bring us back together, because ultimately we need a resolution. I think Donald Trump probably still wants to get a deal. And so I don't think this is the end of the story.
That's the question. If he gets a deal, will all be forgiven, Stephanie? At the same time, the United States, Ukraine's allies watching very closely. President Zelenskyy meeting with the British Prime Minister. He's going to be holding other meetings with his European leaders. What are the broader implications as the United States allies on the world stage watch this? They've already expressed concerns. Could Russia be looking to go into other, or to neighboring NATO nations, I should say?
I think the allies and adversaries alike are looking at this, and what is crystallizing for them is what an America First foreign policy looks like. And this is abandoning decades of what has given America competitive advantage on the world stage. And that has been the strength of our alliances built on shared democratic values and shared interests. We're now trading all of that for short-term deals and relationships in which there's a transaction cost for dealing with the United States, whether you're an ally or an adversary. And so that's really shifting what people are thinking. And I think in capitals all across the world, leaders are trying to recalibrate to the new America.
Yeah, Julio, how do you think this plays out, and what are you watching for as we wait to see if these talks do get back on track?
I mean, I think the big question is this a major shift in American foreign policy, or is it President Trump doing things differently to achieve what he wants, peace in Ukraine? But the fact is that I've been able to talk to some Ukrainian refugees that I met a few years ago, and they've expressed this hopelessness and fear that they don't know what's going to happen to their country. It's basically trapped between Russia and the USA. And I feel like this uncertainty is shared by other allies. This is bigger than Ukraine. This is about American allies. Just look at Mexico or Canada. They are neighbors, trading partners, and they might be facing tariffs next week. So a lot of uncertainty in the middle of this.
Fascinating to hear from refugees and that real-world impact that blow-up is having. Carol, this is the backdrop as President Trump prepares to address the nation in his joint address on Tuesday night. What are you watching for Tuesday?
Well, what White House officials say is the president, unsurprisingly, is going to walk through what he sees as his accomplishments over the past 6 weeks, and including during his first term. He'll tout some of those as well, and he'll have a lot of what one official said were made-for-TV moments. But the thing that I'm looking for is, you know, President Trump told you right after he was elected that he won on the border and groceries. What does he say about those costs for Americans that they're still dealing with that he promised to bring down on day one?
Yeah, Julio, the fact that he's not going to be able to say prices have come down, the fact that he's not going to be able to say we're on the path to peace, what do you think the stakes are Tuesday night for him?
I think it's a very important night for President Trump, and I agree. He made two big promises during his campaign, right? Fight inflation, fight immigration, and so far, consumer satisfaction is dropping, consumer confidence, I mean. Inflation might be coming up, and deportations are not where he wants them to be yet. So he still has big challenges in front of him.
Higher than it was under the end of the Biden administration, but not quite where he wants it to be. Brendan, how do you see this unfolding? I anticipate he's going to tout the cuts that Elon Musk is carrying out, but it's a fine line he's got to walk there.
Yeah, we heard a lot this morning about waste, fraud, and abuse, and they're at the same time the government, the president, trying to talk about we're going to balance the budget. I'll be very interested to see how he plans to outline that. It's frankly nonsense to talk about we're going to balance the budget through waste, fraud, and abuse. So they're talking about $100 billion a year in improper payments. We had an almost $2 trillion deficit just this past year alone. And there is no waste, fraud, and abuse line item in the budget that they can just outlaw. Now, I'm all for getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, and if Elon Musk can actually find places to do it, that's fine. But there is such a disconnect by saying we're going to balance the budget and we are never going to touch Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's just simply impossible, and I wish there would be a little more honesty about how we're going to get there. So take it with a grain of salt when they say they want to balance the budget.
Stephanie, Senator Sanders was pretty clear. He said it's not going to happen. Medicaid and other entitlements will be touched. Do you think Democrats are pushing back? Have they found their voice in this moment yet?
I think they're starting to find their voice, but what they really need to do is get out of Washington and get into their communities. I think this last election demonstrated that voters didn't feel like Democrats shared their concerns. And I'll tell you, having stood in front of town halls, your community, when you talk to the people, they'll tell you what they care about and the intensity with which they care about it, as well as how to talk about it. And I think those are all things, lessons that Democrats could really use in this moment as they try to understand what the chaos of the slash and burn of federal agencies and federal programs has on actual Americans.
Yeah, and we've been watching those town halls already start to play out. Great conversation. Thank you all. Before we go, a quick programming note. Join NBC News on Tuesday for special coverage of President Trump's address to Congress. Coverage begins at 8 p.m. Eastern on NBC News Now and at 9 p.m. on NBC News. That is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. We will be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.